Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Hello, I'm Megan Rust, Interpretation Director at the Frist Art Museum. Thank you for joining us for this evening's Curator's Perspective lecture with Catherine Futter. We will begin with a land acknowledgement. The Frist Art Museum's building sits on land that Cherokee, Shawnee, and Yuchi Native peoples and elders and their ancestors call their homeland. We acknowledge and pay respect to them. We also acknowledge and offer deep gratitude to the ancestral land and water that support us. Tonight's lecture is presented in conjunction with the exhibition American Art Deco, Designing for the People, 1918 through 1939. The exhibition is co-organized by the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art, Kansas City, Missouri, and the Jocelyn Art Museum, Omaha, Nebraska, and will be on view in our Ingram Gallery through January 2nd, 2022. The Frist Art Museum would like to thank Senior Curator Katie Delmay for overseeing our presentation of the exhibition here in Nashville. And we gratefully acknowledge our supporters. Platinum sponsor HCA Healthcare, TriStar Health, hospitality sponsor Union Station Hotel, community engagement supporters, First Horizon Foundation and the Wingate Foundation, and Spanish translation sponsor, Vanderbilt University's Center for Latin American Studies. And as always, we're grateful for the continuing operating support from the Frist Foundation, the Metro Nashville Arts Commission, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few reminders. At the end of our conversation, we'll take questions from the audience, and you can submit your questions anytime throughout the presentation by using the Q&A feature. And thank you in advance for your patience with us as we present this program online. In the event of a technical difficulty, we'll pause the presentation and we'll work quickly to resolve the issue. If you're having technical difficulties on your personal device, please use the chat feature to send us a message and we'll do our best to assist you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter and the organizing curator of American Art Deco Designing for the People, Catherine Futter. Catherine Futter is the interim director of curatorial affairs and the senior curator of decorative arts at the Brooklyn Museum. Previously, she was at the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City for almost 18 years. While there, she held positions of director curatorial affairs and the Helen Jane and R. Hugh Pat Uhlmann Curator of Architecture, Design, and Decorative Arts. Catherine has a bachelor's degree from Duke University and earned her doctorate from Yale University, where her focus was American Decorative Arts. Catherine Futter has curated a number of permanent collection installations of European and American art, as well as numerous exhibitions, including the International Loan Exhibition, Inventing the Modern World, Decorative Arts at the World's Fairs, 1851 through 1939, which was accompanied by an award-winning catalog. A generalist in the history of design and decorative arts, her scholarly focus is on the transcultural connections in 19th century decorative arts. She's now working on re-examining decorative arts to reveal inequities in their creation and ownership. Please join me in welcoming Catherine Futter.
Okay. Thank you, Megan, so much. And it's such a tremendous pleasure to be back in Nashville. My sister lives here, so I haven't visited for a while. But I also really want to thank the Frist for taking the exhibition, because I cannot think of a better venue for an exhibition about Art Deco. And it is the perfect venue with the original post office. Here we see the Frist Art Museum, which is originally the Nashville Post Office, which was built between 1933 and 1934 under the architectural firm of Marr and Holman. And you can see some of the architectural details of the building. So the setting for this exhibition couldn't be more perfect. And actually the exhibition is going to be in 4 museums. that all are in Art Deco buildings, because this was a time when American, especially in the center of the country, America was building great collections of art and bringing culture to the center of the country. So I want to start with what is Art Deco. And actually the term didn't come into being until the 1960s, and it actually comes from the exhibition that you see on the screen, the Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes. So you heard me say Art Décoratif, so decorative arts, Art Deco, and that became the sort of shorthand for what this style was. The Paris 1925 exposition took place along the Seine. It was organized right after the First World War in 1918. And after Europe had been really devastated by the war, France really wanted to reassume its center as the fashionable center of the world, and also really wanted to jumpstart the economy after the devastation of the First World War. So this exhibition really focused on modern design and architecture, not on modern art. And I should back up, because up until the 1960s, this was called modern art. It was not called Art Deco. And it was called New Art, modern. So in 1925, the organizers of the exposition invited different countries to participate. Of course, France was the major participant, and we have, you can see the overall vision of the fair. But the fair had pavilions designed by major architects, and they were sponsored by department stores and also major designers. They were temporary pavilions. They were not built to last. They were made out of plaster, but they were in the latest styles. And here we see 3 of the pavilions from the fair. One of the most important parts of the fair was the fact that it really focused on luxury objects. And here I am showing Émile Jacques Uhlmann's Hôtel de Collectionneur, the hotel or the palace of a collector. And as you can see from this slide, the images are full of luxurious objects of lacquer, painted glass, ebony and ivory furniture. It was very much about luxury and also about contemporary design. It was not to look to the past. And in fact, the United States had been invited to participate in the 1925 fair. And the then Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover, said, there is no modern design in America. And so the Americans did not participate. This must have been a little bit of a head scratcher to some American designers who thought they were designing in a modern style. But in point of fact, were not allowed to participate. But that didn't stop American manufacturers and designers to travel to Paris to see this great exhibition and to get ideas. Also, collectors went, and buyers and society people went to Paris to see the fair. And these are the kinds of things that they saw when they were there. So these are very expensive, very luxurious objects. You see the Uhlmann cabinet on the left, that is ebony inlaid with ivory, the Jean Dunant lacquer vase in the center, and the reverse painted panel that actually comes from the steamship, the Normandy, by Jean Dupas, were all part of these designs. French Art Deco was very much looking at the past and the classical past, but so did our American Art Deco. And I sort of pull up this slide, which shows the Frist, the museum, which really we can almost see it as an example of classical architecture, albeit flattened and abstracted, but still, I show you the Parthenon from, say, 500 BCE, but you can still see that rectilinearity. And if we look to the previous style that really was popular in Europe, was the Art Nouveau, which was very much based on organic design. So as I say, things look like they will have grown or moved. That is not the case with Art Deco. Art Deco is very static, it's very flat, two-dimensional, and also really abstracts the human form, the animal form, and botanical forms. It is about abstraction. And that you can even see in the interior of the Frist. I love this lighting fixture here that you see with the fluted lantern, which really reflects the kinds of Doric columns that you see on the original Parthenon, but also on the reproduction of it made for the 1897 Nashville World's Fair. So it was very much, classicism never really goes away. And so here we see the Art Deco version of classicism. But American Art Deco is also about something else, and it's not really about the luxury goods that we see in the European Art Deco. It's really actually about modernity and also about progress, especially industrial progress. So here we see interior grill work at the Frist, but also images that were very much an influence on American Art Deco, and that's trains and planes and also automobiles. So I show you images of that. It was also about the skyscraper. It was the beginning of really building enormous and tall structures because they could be built. The technology, the engineering technology had developed in order to build many-storied buildings. Another influence on American Art Deco styles are the contemporary styles of the international style, or very much sort of modern, stripped down architecture. Here we see another pavilion from the 1925 fair by Le Corbusier, and you could see just the very spare, unornamented design that really also influenced American design, as we will see as we move forward into the exhibition. Another important influence, and also one that really impacted American design, was the Bauhaus. And the Bauhaus was established in 1919 in Weimar, Germany, and was a school that really trained architects and designers to create mass productive objects for mass production, such as inexpensive furniture and household goods. They really were, they're the embodiment of function over ornamentation, or form follows function. So it is not about ornament, but it's about geometric forms, modern materials, simplified color schemes. And here we can see some of the designs using industrially produced materials such as tubular steel to give this chair by Mies van der Rohe on the lower left, the cantilevered, which allows ergonomics so that people of different weights and sizes could be comfortable in this chair, or it could also be made into very simple tables. Another influence on American Art Deco is Russian constructivism, again, eliminating dimension and really making things very much two-dimensional and very graphic. A designer who also was looking towards Russian constructivism is Eva Zeitz, who worked first in Germany and then came to America and worked for different companies. This is the beginning of the industrial designer. Although she was not trained by the Bauhaus, she visited the 1925 Paris exposition where she saw Bauhaus designs, and she also was very much involved in industrial production. So here you see her tea service that's in the exhibition, which is simple forms that use bright colors. These simple forms could be industrially produced, and so that they could be affordable to more consumers. And that was another part of the Bauhaus ethic, was to create objects that could be afforded by more people. But going back to sort of the exhibition, we sort of open with Paris to America. Some of the objects that were shown in 1925 actually traveled to the United States in 1927 and went to various cities around the country to be displayed in museums, in department stores. They could be for sale. One of the most popular glass manufacturers, who then also was collected in the United States, was Rene Lalique. And originally a jeweler, he used molded glass at first to embellish necklaces, but then built out of that and developed more vases and bowl shapes. These were blown into molds, and yet these objects are then hand finished. And so they were, again, luxury objects, not mass produced, as we'll see when we get to Depression glass later on. And I'm showing you an image of, the big image is actually shows you the abstracted lizard forms that are on the black vase, which is in the exhibition. America, this was a boom town, boom time after the First World War, and there was a great deal of construction going on. Cities, especially cities that had industrial wealth, were building at astronomical scales. And so we have artists really capturing that moment. Here is a sketch by Thomas Hart Benton, the Missouri artist, called Construction from 1923. He went around and made sketches of industrial scenes of laborers in and around New York City. As he said, he wanted to capture the activity, the action of the American people as they built up and industrialized the city. And what were they building? They were building these skyscrapers. The Chrysler Building in 1930, the Empire State Building in 1931. One of the things that really changed the silhouettes of these buildings was a 1916 New York zoning ordinance that made it mandatory that tall buildings would have to have setbacks. Because if you can imagine just straight buildings going 60 stories into the sky, they would not allow light and air to get down to the street level. So the zoning ordinance made it mandatory that these tall buildings would have to have setbacks. And so you get these wonderful silhouettes from these tall skyscrapers. Electricity had also been commonplace in the 1920s. So here we see the Chrysler Building that was using light also as embellishment. And I really would like to take a close look at the Chrysler Building because I think it also really embodies some of the decoration and also shows what these, especially in the 1920s, was so important in American architecture. And that is really the monuments, or one can almost call them cathedrals to commerce. So the Chrysler Building was not built by the Chrysler Corporation, but actually was built by Walter Chrysler himself personally, so that his family would have something to do and have the inheritance of this building. It was embellished with all kinds of references to how Walter Chrysler made his money. So you see on the upper left, you can see the fact that there is the side of a car, you see the wheels, but you also see this fantastically large hood ornament. And in the Art Deco exhibition are a great number of hood ornaments. And we've had discussions about how large they seem. Well, some of the cars that Chrysler built were very large. And so these hood ornaments would have been in scale. You could see new materials like the eagle that projects from the facade, the sides of the Chrysler Building, made out of aluminum. So new materials coming into being used. And then these lobbies were very much the luxurious displays of wealth. And so the Chrysler Building lobby, which you see, is all different kinds of marbles and woods. And so they were really these temples and cathedrals to commerce. And here we see in the lobby of the Chrysler Building a real paean to the industrialization and all the things that it takes to manufacture in the United States. Artists also became very interested in capturing this new energy of the American city. So we have a lot of images that really use that kind of the two-dimensionality that we see in Art Deco as one of the hallmarks of this period in photography especially. So we see the old building on the right-hand side from the photograph by Bernice Abbott, and then we see the modern skyscraper on the left. And other buildings also used Art Deco embellishments to really signal their uses. So here we have in the exhibition in the center, you see the small John Bradley Stores series. It is the maquette for the huge sculpture that's on top of the Chicago Board of Trade building, still stands in Chicago, made out of aluminum, a new material. And this sculpture relates to the ancient Roman goddess of grain. So we'll also see that, as I mentioned earlier, about the classical origins of the Art Deco. So here we have the series, this very reductive classical sculpture of the goddess of grain being on the top of the Chicago Board of Trade building, which was the world's largest grain exchange at the time. I mentioned the classical influence on Art Deco, and here we see two sculptures, both with using classical themes. So artists very much were looking at Greek and Roman sculpture for inspiration, such as Paul Manship in Danae that you see on the left, very using the solid form and reductive form of classical design, not a very naturalistic or realistic image of a woman. And then you also see Icarus as he's falling by Donald DeLeo in this very dynamic and yet also very solid and abstracted of Icarus as he plummets to the earth as having gotten too close to the sun. This is a period where artists also really were focusing on the confidence and also the superiority and the promise of the country. And so you see in the image of the Rockwell Kent. Rockwell Kent was an illustrator and painter and printmaker. He was also a lobsterman, a dairy farmer. And he made this woodcut for the American car company's national advertising campaign of 1931. And so he's using this company made also ships. And so he's using this figure of the young man with the broad shoulders going far into the future, sailing confidently into the future as an expression of American confidence. I chose to sort of compare him to the image of Matthew Henson by Weinhold Reitz, which is in the collection of the Fisk University. And I really want to celebrate Fisk and his participation in this exhibition. They've been an incredibly generous lender, and I really encourage you to go to the campus and see the Aaron Douglas murals, to see the Weinhold Reitz pastels. They're absolutely gorgeous. But I also really want to celebrate the fact that Matthew Henson was an African American who accompanied Admiral Perry to the Arctic on 8 different explorations. And here we see him in his sealskin outfit, very pensive. But I really want you to look at the background of the painting, where it's this shattered ice, and yet it's also very much in the Art Deco style, really gets you that two-dimensionality. This was also a period of great expansion. Although the railroads had united the east and west coasts of the United States in the 1860s, it was also really a time of building the transcontinental roadways and also of paving the roads and the car. This is the beginning of America's love affair with the car and the beginning of car culture. So Henry Ford had revolutionized American transportation by making automobiles more accessible with the introduction of the Model T. The Model A, which we see here, was a great marketing success, and it was produced from 1927 to 1932, and over 4.3 million cars were produced. The car had more elegant styling than the Model T. It had improved fuel efficiency. It had a laminated glass safety windshield. It had hydraulic shock absorbers, and it had a 4-cylinder engine that could go 65 miles an hour. So we were on our way to being a car culture because it was also incredibly affordable. So going back to designing for the people, this was very much a car that could be afforded by many more people than luxury cars. This car culture and the transportation is also very much captured by artists who really saw that transportation was and communication were important aspects of the 1920s and 30s. But all of this expansion and the roadways was not always positive. It was meant that roads went through sacred native lands and also cut up African-American neighborhoods. So there was a great, this was not always, and most of the time, not sensitively done. Here we see an N.C. Wyeth advertisement for the Fisk Tire Company. N.C. Wyeth was a very important illustrator. And here we see the car racing away, leaving the Native Americans literally in the dust as they speed towards quote unquote progress. And this was the future. Artists like Thomas Hart Benton very much were affected by looking at the past and the way Indigenous and African American people had been treated, and used this as a subject for his great historical American epic. And this is one of the panels from that, which is the discovery. And you see the Native American as the conquistadors arrive on the shores, and they're questioning and doubt as to really what the impact is going to be on the land and on the culture. One of the other really important aspects of this exhibition is foregrounding the Harlem Renaissance, especially artists such as Aaron Douglas. And here we have two images. Aaron Douglas was the chair of the art department at Fisk University from 1944 to 1966. He was really known as the Dean of African American Painters. He combined African themes with modern art aesthetics. He was not the only one, but he certainly was a promoter that ancient Egypt was part of Egypt and part of the African experience and not necessarily part of the Greek-Roman experience. Here we see in a marvelous work, Building More Stately Mansions, which refers to the Oliver Wendell Holmes poem, The Chambered Nautilus. And it really shows that African laborers have been building the most iconic architectural marvels of the world, from the pyramids to the modern skyscraper. So if we move from left to right, we see the pyramid and the Sphinx. Then we go to Greek and Roman architecture. We see a medieval spire in the center of the painting. And then we see the crane for building the skyscraper. And below we see the African-American laborers who've been building and constructing those mansions really since the beginning of time. On the right-hand screen is Noah's Ark from God's Trombones, 7 Negro Sermons in Verse. Aaron Douglas did these originally as illustrations to James Weldon Johnson's verses. And then in the 1930s, he expanded his illustrations to easel paintings. And this is the 5th in the series, And so we see Noah not as a white man, but actually as a black man based in Africa, really as the foundation of the biblical stories. As I mentioned, Aaron Douglas was a very well-known African-American painter, but he also was a great illustrator and a great member of the Harlem Renaissance. He participated in a publication called Fire that came out in 1926, and I show you the cover of it, both the front and also the back. And I hope that you will, when you come to the exhibition, you'll actually scroll through. There's a wonderful interactive where you can look through this issue of Fire. But you'll see, as you start looking at the figure more closely, you'll see the Sphinx in the foreground, then the image of the African man. His chin becomes sub-Saharan Africa, and you start seeing that figure. And again, that I'm really looking that Africa is part of the ancient world, the ancient Egyptian world, but also the fact that it is the foundation of humanity. Another aspect of the exhibition is really thinking about the role of women. Women had, during the First World War, as men went off to fight on the front, women took over businesses and farms, as well as worked in factories, not only for making munitions and armaments, but also other factory jobs. But they also were trying to get more recognition in the art world, recognition that really was only coming to white women artists, and very few of them. So we see on the left, Helen Torr. She was the wife of Arthur Dove, more well known. But she only exhibited twice during her life and really was not getting the recognition, even though she was part of the Stieglitz Circle. Show you a glass work by Georgia O'Keeffe, made for the firm of Steuben Glass. And she was the only woman out of 27 American artists who were selected by Steuben to work on a project in 1939 to have artists collaborate with the glass studio. She's using Jimson weed and with her characteristic abstracted flowers. This is also the period of the jazz culture. And so we have, it was a time of fun, and as we'll see, it's also a time of prohibition. Victor Schreckengoss's dish, his Danse Moderne plate, jazz plate, really captures that moment of fun, of the cabarets, of the dance halls, where people would dance the night away as big bands played for hours and hours. And we have the era of the flapper, and so include some outfits from that. Prohibition, which lasted from 1920 to 1933, and this was the era of the speakeasy, which had made speakeasies were establishments that sold alcoholic beverages illegally. Prohibition made it illegal to sell, transport, or manufacture intoxicating beverages. And so, despite it being the law, Prohibition made drinking and alcoholic beverages go underground. And so there was a whole nother culture that was for the speakeasy culture. This was, as I said, the time of big bands, cabarets, and here we see Carl van Vechten's photographs of some of the notable artists participating, from Bessie Smith and Ethel Waters to Cab Calloway and the great actor Paul Robeson. I love this image, again, a loan from Fisk University of Congo. Congo was a dancer, a Zulu dancer who danced with a boa constrictor on the roof of the Almac Hotel, and he was worried that his masculinity would be lost if he cut his hair, so he used fire to sort of singe it and burn it. And I just think that this powerful gaze and direct look really sort of encapsulates his, but also Weinhold Wright's depiction of him. Entertainment was also extremely important, especially the radio. Radio was a form of not only getting your news, but also of entertainment. Radio shows, which would be theater or music or fireside chats, were important ways of communication. And it was also the beginning of the movie palace. Movie palaces helped people to escape from the Depression and from really the economic burdens of the Depression. So here I show you a movie theater in Crossville, Tennessee, so about 90 minutes due east of Nashville, that's still being used as a theater and a movie theater, as also a drama theater as well as a movie theater. And I just mentioned the Depression. With the stock market collapse in 1929, the country and actually the entire world went under a great economic depression, and millions of people were out of work and starving. This was further impacted by the Dust Bowl, which related to over farming, and with climate change and great climate changes that affected the landscape. It meant that the food production was also affected. And so you had these double economic and agricultural disasters. Here we see the iconic image by Dorothea Lange of the migrant mother, the Madonna of the Depression, one could call her, and Carl Wermer's American Farmer, this man who seems to be sort of looking in very stoically looking into the future of the American farm, and where would that go? During the Depression, artists, writers were put to work, and also artists were put to work to not only document the effects of the Depression, but also to paint murals in buildings, to write poems and stories and things like that in order to keep them employed during these great economic hardship times. So we see images by Dorothea Lange of migrant workers and also bread lines. This is also a time when you need economic stimulation, and one of the ways to stimulate the economy is to encourage people to buy new objects. So styles changed with great rapidity, many of them in the Art Deco style. So we see a selection of Depression glass, and on the left-hand side of the screen are two pieces by the Indiana Glass Company, which was the first producer of Depression glass, and created this pattern called the Tea Room, which was introduced in 1926, that was definitely inspired by French Art Deco examples. The Tea Room line had sundae dishes, cream pitchers, sugar bowls, and goblets, and was very popular in private tea rooms and salons for that. Depression glass often comes in these, they were molded in and mass produced, came in colors of these pinks and greens, yellows, very bright colors, I think really to alleviate the fact that this was a very economically depressed time. In the center, we see one of the most iconic images of Art Deco glass, which is the Ruba rhombic pieces. And this was designed by father and son Haley for Consolidated Glass. They had traveled to Paris in 1925 and seen the Lalique glass, and as well as Cubist art, and so created about 40 angular vessels like this that had jutting trapezoids and triangles that really were, as you can see from the other pieces on the screen, really were very different in their aesthetic. Again, they were produced in these bright and translucent colors like yellows and greens. New materials come very much into vogue during this period, such as aluminum. In the 19th century, aluminum was considered a precious metal, and now it becomes used for all different kinds of objects, household goods, as well as planes and trains, lightweight but also very strong. So we see Warren MacArthur's chair on the left-hand side of the screen, and this was the first time that aluminum was used for furniture. And so the two being allowed these sort of very elegant but industrially produced goods to be produced. We see also the Congo cocktail shaker, again made out of aluminum, that allowed you to have cocktails in your home. You put a hand on each handle and then be able to quickly shake up your smooth cocktail. And you see the Streamline, so those planes and trains that I mentioned in the beginning of the talk really start influencing the design of everything from irons to vacuum cleaners. New materials and new processes like chrome plating of metal allowed designers to create objects that looked like they were made out of very expensive materials like silver and ivory, but they were actually made out of chrome plated metal and plastic. So everything becomes influenced by these sort of images of transportation. One of the things I have not mentioned is working on this exhibition during the pandemic and during the unrest after the murder of George Floyd was really like looking back 100 years. And so I think that there's very much a resonance and a relevance to the past in the Art Deco exhibition that seems very present as you go through the exhibition. Finally, I'd like to say that Art Deco is around us everywhere, and so I thought I would put some examples of Art Deco in Tennessee. You have it all around you, from the Davidson County Courthouse here in Nashville. That I hope that these, again, I hope you see all the references that I've been using in the talk about the classical sculpture, the flattening of the patterns. These are very classical kind of buildings, very regular, some luxurious materials, or the effect of luxurious materials within the interiors. And the Knoxville Post Office and Courthouse from 1934, again, seeing these very abstracted kinds of forms, but also the influence of the classical architecture. And smaller courthouses were built during the 1930s. As I mentioned, architects and designers were put to work during the 30s, during the Depression, to keep people employed. So there was a great, whereas in the 20s, you have people like Walter Chrysler building monuments really to their own businesses and to themselves. During the 1930s and the Depression, you really have the government taking over that role as commissioner of architecture. And finally, really looking at Fisk. This afternoon, I was able to go to the Cravath Memorial Library at Fisk and see these fantastic Aaron Douglas murals. So I really want you to encourage you to seek out this resource, which is tremendous. And again, I really want to thank Fisk, but I also want to thank the Frist for their tremendous support for this exhibition. So I'm happy to try to answer any questions that I can. Megan?
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was a fantastic lecture, and I love the way that you connected the exhibition to some of our local landmarks here in Nashville and in Tennessee. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we will get to a few here. We did have a question during your lecture about women artists, and Stephen asked if women were not receiving recognition for their art, were they still creating art, and where has it ended up?
That's a great question. I think we're more and more today, we're looking at those artists that really were marginalized, whether it's women artists or artists of color, and more attention is being focused on them today than probably ever before. So we have great discoveries to be made, I think.
Yes, definitely. We have a few questions about the library at Fisk and the wonderful Aaron Douglas murals that you shared with us. And I don't know off the top of my head if it's open by appointment or just open to the general public. If anyone knows, and I can try to look it up really quickly, we can put it in the chat.
I think it might be by appointment.
I think that sounds right to me, but I'll just double check, and we can.
I think going to see the Beinhold Reitzes in the library is much, much easier.
Okay.
And those are, you walk in and they're mostly to your right, but they're also, you can find some on the back wall as well.
Great. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to go and visit Fisk.
So was I.
And we are just thrilled to have the works in our exhibition here. And we've also got a wonderful piece from the Tennessee State Museum as well. So
yes,
great local connections. Stephanie asked where else the exhibition is touring.
The exhibition was in Omaha, and after the Frist, then it goes to the Wichita Art Museum, and then it goes to the Nelson-Atkins next summer.
Thank you. Trying to get the chat open here. I see some things coming in. Mary asked, was the Art Deco style of architecture more apparent in some parts of the country than others?
That's an interesting question. I'm going to say that I'm going to say it's a pretty much a national style. I will say that when it comes to domestic architecture, you can see I didn't have any domestic architecture in Tennessee. I think when you go to the coasts, then you find more Art Deco residential architecture, but it is really pretty much everywhere. Some of it is not as elaborate as the Chrysler Building or the Frist, but certainly a lot of post offices and municipal buildings. I think a lot of cities have municipal auditorium that were built in the 1930s, again, really to keep the economy going and to keep people employed.
So is that why buildings like the Chrysler Building have such elaborate lobbies? Was that sort of planned before the stock market crash, or was it just something to keep industry moving and give people jobs?
Well, for the Chrysler Building is a little bit different than, because it really was a private enterprise. I mean, Walter Chrysler was actually not the original developer of that site. I think it was a Mr. Reynolds. And William Van Allen actually had started designing it, but then Walter Chrysler took over, and that's why it has all those emblems of the Chrysler car manufacturing, but the corporation never owned that building. It was always the family. So it was really a monument to Chrysler himself and his. But I think for the Chrysler Building, it's probably more, and Rockefeller Center, John Rockefeller, those were more personal monuments and showing how wealthy they were then when you get to some of the municipal auditoriums, then I think that is really using materials and actually trying to convey luxury, actually with less expensive materials.
Thank you. That was a helpful clarification there. Another question that we just received, maybe another comparison. Sally asked the difference between European and American Art Deco styles.
I think of American art, well, let me go the other way. I think of European Art Deco as being very much more of a luxurious style and very much about expensive materials and expensive woods and using especially things that came from the French and the European colonies in Africa. So as I mentioned, ebony and ivory, which were coming from the African continent. And then in America, it's really much more about aluminum or plastics or paint that is made to look like it's made from more expensive objects. But more, I think it's really based on the transportation. When I talk about the cars, the trains, planes, and automobiles, that's why I talk, because it's much more about progress and speed. And European Art Deco, I think, is looking much more at neoclassicism and looking at the classical past than it is at the industrial future.
Thank you.
That was clear. I hope that was clear.
Yeah, I think I bring up this object a lot. If anyone has talked to me about this show, they'll know that I love this object. There's a small clock in the exhibition that is so gorgeous, but it's chrome and bakelite plastic, but it looks like silver and it looks like ivory, and I love that little clock.
It is a lovely clock, but I think that's, and if I were to put up two slides to compare, I would put that like the Uhlmann cabinet and then your clock, because then you could really see that one is all about luxury and also looking at the past, and the other one is really about the future, the present and the future.
I think we have time for a couple more. One more question about the Chrysler Building, asking about the gargoyles, if they're made of steel or aluminum. Do you know?
I think you're probably right that they're steel, but I would have to check. Years and years ago, I got into the cloud room, which is in the top of the spire of the Chrysler Building. It was really fun, but I don't think you can go up there anymore.
Well, speaking of places you can go, I've gotten a few comments about Fisk University and the murals and the galleries. The gallery is open, but they ask that you reserve a time on their website for your visit. And the murals are mostly by appointment. And our curator, Katie, recommended contacting the gallery for an appointment. So if you're interested and haven't been over to Fisk to see the Aaron Douglas murals and the amazing works they have in the gallery, we encourage you to do that and come down to the Frist and see the works that we have here in our exhibition. And we did have a question about virtual exhibit online. We don't have a virtual exhibit online, but we are doing online tours. Thursdays at 1:30 p.m. you can take a Zoom tour with one of our fantastic docents. And you can see some installation pictures and look at some of the objects in the exhibition up close. And I'd like to invite you all to come see American Art Deco, Designing for the People, 1918 through 1939, here in person at the Frist Art Museum. We hope to see you soon, or we hope to see you online at our next program. And you can find out more about upcoming virtual programs and upcoming in-person programs by visiting fristartmuseum.org, by following us on social media at Frist Art Museum, or by signing up for our weekly email newsletter. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. Thank you so much, Catherine, for a fantastic introduction to this exhibition. And thank you all for spending your Friday evening with us. We're grateful for your support of the Frist Art Museum. Financial gifts during this time allow us to bring you great programming like today's lecture. Support of any amount is greatly appreciated. Please consider making a donation at fristartmuseum.org. Thank you all again. Have a great night.